Good day, everybody. Zack here with RevZilla, and welcome to another episode of Daily Rider. Our guest today is the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450. That is a 450cc single-cylinder engine. It has a 21-inch front wheel for adventuring, and it has a base price of just under $6,000. Royal Enfield, I think, is most famous for making bikes that look and feel pretty old, right? The company's had a lot of success over the decades in doing that. This Himalayan 450 is supposed to take the company to the next step in many ways by building a bike that is more modern in the way that it looks and feels. And that means the looming question here is pretty obvious, I think. Is the Himalayan 450 more modern in all the right ways? Or is it so modern that it doesn't feel like a Royal Enfield anymore? It's a sticky situation the company's in. We're gonna answer that question and many more on the ride to work. Let's go, everybody. Alrighty, everybody, before we get going on this Himalayan 450 daily ride, a quick reminder that this video is brought to you by RevZilla. RevZilla is, of course, an e-commerce platform, not just this YouTube channel, but a place that you can buy parts for your motorcycle and apparel for yourself. When you do those things, when you make a purchase at RevZilla.com, a little bit of every dollar you spend goes into making programming like this, Daily Rider, or the Shop Manual with Ari Henning, High Side, Low Side Podcast, or CTXP Adventures. And that's really the whole message here. We just hope that when it comes time to purchase something for you or your bike, you have RevZilla in mind, and we hope you like the content. Thanks for watching. Alrighty, everybody. The Royal Enfield Himalayan 450. A couple things we can note in the architecture of this bike. This is the Sherpa 450 liquid-cooled engine. The previous Himalayan from Royal Enfield was a 411cc air-cooled engine. This is obviously a completely new mill and indeed a completely new motorcycle. Another thing to note is the frame, which, unlike the sort of classic Royal Enfield motorcycles that followed the sort of more archaic motorcycle styling of having a double cradle frame underneath, this has little steel tube spars that reach down and grab the top of the engine here, connect to the headstock, and go back to the rest of the frame. Not exactly groundbreaking, but a departure from a lot of the motorcycles that Royal Enfield has produced up to this point. You got an upside down fork up front here from Showa, and a linkage shock in the back, a 17-inch rear wheel and a 21-inch front, not an 18 in the back, which is sort of the 1821 is kind of like maybe the true pure adventure style. The 1721 is a little bit more of the, well, it's just a different take, I suppose, on an adventure bike setup. The rest of the bike is pretty basic, as you can see, nothing super special. Aside maybe from these front racks, which is sort of a Royal Enfield trademark. A couple of little cues I'll point out. One is the fully clear windshield here, which is sort of like leaves the bike looking fairly naked at the front, though it does provide a little bit of wind protection, as we'll experience when we're out on the road. Another thing is the adventure style double fender thing, where it has this beak up to the front, sort of dirt bike style beak, and then this big fender that comes back that even has a big tail on it here for water and mud and that kind of thing. We'll see if we can find some of that on the ride today. Aside from that, it's a 452cc engine. It's made for adventure, going places, getting places, doing things. So let's go someplace and do something, shall we? We'll flick on this cool little circular TFT situation, which I think flickers pretty wildly on the camera, so I apologize for that. You're gonna have to get used to it. And we'll fire up this 452cc single. Thumpa, 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 thumpa. Does it sound like a single cylinder engine? Yep. So it do. Okay, I think that's just about it, everybody. The seat is a two-piece seat, which means it's adjustable. It's in the high position right now, so it does go down a little bit from there, and the passenger perch is a slightly smaller little pad behind. Okay, that's probably enough, right? Let's go do the thing, shall we? And ride to work. All right, so quick run through of the specific specifications. It is $5,800 for the Himalayan 450, just under $6,000. As I said, it has a 4.5 gallon tank, and when that tank was full, it weighed in on the Daily Rider scales at 437 pounds. The seat height is 32.5 inches in the low position. In the high position that I have it in, it's 33 point something. Still easy for me to flat foot, for what it's worth. I think the seat height feels a little lower than the spec chart reads. From the 452cc single cylinder engine, Royal Enfield claims 40 horsepower, I do believe, and I don't remember how many foot-pounds of torque. But as a reminder, all of the specs are in the description of this video. A couple quick notes on the specs. One is that the weight of the Royal Enfield Himalayan on the scales at the RevZilla West shop there, 437 pounds. That feels a little bit low. I honestly thought the bike was heavier. It feels heavy coming off the kickstand, maybe because it has a bunch of lean to it. But yeah, that was the sort of big standout to me, was that I really thought it weighed more like 450 pounds when I first got on it and rode it. It feels fairly tall and fairly heavy. As for what it feels like to sit on, it is pretty gosh darn agreeable, as you can probably imagine. Yeah, there's like decent leg room, you're nice and upright. It feels pretty narrow between the knees. It seems like Royal Enfield put some effort into making the bike feel small between the rider's legs, but also big enough that full-size people will fit. And at 6'2", I definitely fit just fine. My first impressions of the riding position is that it's basically exactly what any adventure bike should feel like. My first impression of the seat was that it's a nice shape, good foam density, it feels supportive, and yeah, just sort of nice in general. Though it feels like it pitches me forward a little bit. If and ever we get going on the freeway here, we'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, now that we're moving along a little better here, this speed is pretty good for the Himalayan 450. It's pretty comfy doing this. I think if you go faster, actually, up closer to 6,000 RPM, you're going maybe 75 miles an hour. There may be even less vibration in the foot pegs than there is when you slow down to 5,000 RPM. I'm not sure that's totally true, but I actually think the engine is amazingly smooth up to 75 or 80 miles an hour. The engine does run out of power a little bit when you start going 75, 80, like fast American freeway speeds. There's not a lot of extra grunt on tap, but I don't know if there was ever going to be with a 40 horsepower engine, so I'm not super sad about it. Mostly I'm just pretty impressed at how unobtrusive the vibrations are on this bike, considering it's a big single, which, you know, if you've ridden any other big 450 liquid cooled singles, whether it's a sort of modern enduro bike or something like that, I mean, they usually orient themselves in a way that really sacrifices a lot of rider comfort, and Royal Enfield clearly put quite a bit of emphasis and effort into smoothing out the engine at highway speed, and I've been very impressed. Back to that saddle real quick. You know, if you go 50, 55 miles an hour, it starts to get uncomfortable because it does pitch forward, and I don't really like that very much. If you go faster, more like 70, 75, I actually find that the wind kind of pushes your body back and pushes your body weight back on the seat a little bit, and oddly makes it a little bit more comfortable, which I was surprised to discover, I think, and a sort of a weird quirk of the bike's ergonomics. As for fuel economy and range, I think you should expect low 50s for gas mileage at the very least. That's what I got, and I don't think I rode the Himalayan particularly politely. And if you get 50 miles to the gallon, you're going to have pretty darn good range with a 4.5 gallon tank. I even found the fuel gauge to be a little bit pessimistic. The fuel light came on and I thought, okay, 175 miles, 180 miles on the clock or whatever, I should probably fill up, and there was still more than a gallon of gas left. You should be able to clear 200 miles easy, which, as I've said before, I think is the lowest acceptable number for a motorcycle if it wants to call itself an adventure bike, is to be able to go 200 miles on a tank, or at least close to it. All things considered, despite my little complaints about the seat, which I didn't quite get along with, it's a pretty agreeable place to sit. The wind protection is not super great from this little potato chip windshield here. It covers my torso. It really takes the large part of the wind blast away from my chest, and so that means I don't have to like hang on to the bars or, you know, really use my upper body to keep myself upright. But it leaves my helmet out in the wind and my shoulders and arms out in the wind, so it's not really comprehensive wind protection, but it's helpful. I think considering the size and the mantra of the motorcycle in general, I think it suits it. And I'm fairly certain that you'd have pretty good luck if you looked for a larger aftermarket windshield as well. Okay, it's coming to the end of the freeway section here. We can talk about mirrors briefly. These ones are, I don't know if you noticed, but they are round. They're too small, is my basic complaint with the mirrors. And they're round because it looks cool, I imagine. And I get it, but they're too small. They're surprisingly smooth though, not unlike the machine itself for a single cylinder powered motorcycle. All right, just waiting for a green light here, and we can get underway into the neighborhood section of the daily rider route. Now, it's a really common refrain, maybe even a trope, to say that a bike feels heavy, but once you're rolling, it feels so light. But these slow speed manners, I think, is where you really start to, where you can really notice a motorcycle's, screwed that one up, a motorcycle's weight, sort of how it carries itself at low speed. And in general, the Himalayan 450 is pretty good, I think, in part because even though it is pretty heavy, just about 440 pounds, it is pretty narrow and has a nice wide handlebar. And, you know, it has, to some extent, half a mind to ride down a dirt road or down a trail or something like that. And that being the case, the company probably wanted it to feel balanced and at least a little bit precise at low speed. And that benefits riding in an environment like this as well. As for throttle response and clutch feel and that kind of thing, on-off fueling is like not great, but it's not bad. My biggest complaint with throttle response is that it has this sort of like slightly disconnected feel in the fueling. Like your right hand is not always all the way connected to what's going on. I think I've complained about that with the KTMs or BMWs or something like that. So it's not uncommon for other motorcycle brands either. It's a little bit strange, but I adapted to it pretty quickly. And the sort of basic stuff, clutch feel, is as you'd expect it to be, and not surprising in any way that's good or bad, really. Actually, one thing that I really like, as I grab a couple upshifts here, is the transmission. You don't often say sub $6,000 bikes, you're like, wow, the transmission just feels really precise and good. And I don't know if precise is the word I would use, come to think of it, but it feels very communicative. I feel like I always know what's going on when I push or pull up on the shifter. It feels like it has fairly long throws, but yeah, there's like a lot of communication through the pedal, and I feel like that gives me confidence, just sort of satisfying and mechanical to use in a way that not all bikes are. In fact, bikes that are 2 and 3 times as expensive don't often have transmission feel quite like this one. So, a little tip of the cap there to the Himalayan 450. Long story short, pretty good round town manners, as you'd expect from an ADV bike, especially one with a reasonable seat height. It does feel big and heavy, and it can feel a little bit underpowered, but at these speeds, it's fine. It's pretty comfy and, you know, not difficult to ride, which is what we all want, right? Ah, nice. Good foot to stop there, Zacko. Nice. Here we go. Right, Lover's Lane and the passenger accommodations discussion. A bike like this is in a bit of a strange category because it's small, and a lot of people might think, well, most people that are going to go on a quote-unquote adventure on this adventure bike are just going to go by themselves, and that's probably true. But it feels like the kind of bike that if it's designed for any kind of travel or utility, that it should have a good passenger perch. And I'm not sure exactly where the design team fell on that particular question, but I can tell you that the passenger perch seems to be made out of basically the same seat foam as the main rider, and that means it's a nice material. It's a little bit smaller, or sort of noticeably smaller, I should say, as far as surface area, so it probably ultimately won't be quite as comfortable, but it's reasonable, and I think that that is a good call on the part of Royal Enfield. Maybe it was a complete afterthought and they didn't give a rat's batushka, but I think maybe they thought through it a little bit and expected people to take a passenger here and there. I also like the gear spacing, by the way. I guess I didn't really talk about that. I might gear it up just a little bit because I've got a reputation to uphold, and yes, I always want to change the gearing on every single bike. It could be a little taller for me, but in general, pretty good. Spacing's good, ratios are good. Final drive is not too far off, which is rare that I would compliment a bike on that. Here we go into the Twisty Road section of the daily rider route. And if you find yourself on a road like this on the Himalayan 450, I bet you're going to be pretty happy. It's fun. The powertrain is the thing that makes it feel the most kind of archaic and not sporty. You know, it's not exactly a lumbering engine, but it's pretty utilitarian, borderline agricultural, and it, you know, it doesn't inspire you to like spin the engine up and sprint from corner to corner. But as far as the balance of the chassis and how it feels in the middle of a corner, that kind of thing, I think it works well. It works exactly the way I would kind of expect it to in this day and age, where 21-inch front wheel adventure machines like this often are pretty sure-footed and pleasant to ride on a road like this. So yeah, it delivers what it should, and I don't think a whole lot more, but that's okay. Sometimes I comment on the suspension in this section of the road, and I don't want you to think that I forgot, but I don't really have a lot of comments. I think it's good. It would be a long way down the list of things that I would either applaud or complain about on this bike. Kind of similar to the overall feeling of going through corners on this bike in general. It does what it should, and I appreciate that. How good is the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 on a twisty road? Good enough that I'm sad to go back to surface streets, because I was having fun. Off we go, everybody. Hold on tight. Wrap. All right, we got a red light, everybody. We're going to talk about brakes. Slow down, little Hemi. Whoa. That was pretty good. Better than I expected. I didn't get my downshifts in. The brakes are fine. Not a lot of bite. A little bit sign of the budget in the levers, which are not adjustable. Pretty basic. And the braking hardware is a caliper by Bybri, which is the Brembo subsidiary in India. I believe it's been in India, or yeah, somewhere like that. And I believe it's a 320 mil disc. It's a single disc, of course, and it's not quite enough brake for me. I'll say the same thing I said about the Ibex 450 from CF Moto, which is that full-size bike with a single disc is often, even a low horsepower bike, doesn't feel like quite enough to me. I'd probably experiment with bitier pads if it tore up to me. All right, enough braking talk, Zach. What about the old Dashima? Who's it? Like I said, I think it's kind of flickery for you all, and I do apologize, so I won't spend too much time on it. But basically all controlled by this little joystick down here. See this little guy? You can, yeah, move through the fuel consumption, voltage, service reminders. What do we got? Fuel range, trip meters, and then you can go over to the right and then up, I think. Yeah, and then you can go through a bunch of settings to change the clock and the system, and I think there's Bluetooth connectivity and that kind of thing. I think it's a pretty handsome setup. I think it works pretty well. I don't think the fuel gauge need to be so kind of cutesy and radial, I guess, but that's not a huge point to make. I think that the joystick is not very good. I don't like it. It's strange. I don't often know, like right now, can I go right or left, up? I hit home to go back, and then go left, and then go down. It's not super intuitive, in my opinion. Green light. And I don't think that the feel of the joystick is very good, but I have managed to survive this far. But I do think it's a pretty handsome dash, with one exception, which is that when you turn on the blinker, it's a little hard to see, especially at night when it turns black and there's a green blinker reminder thing on there. Maybe this isn't super important to you, but it shows a little bit of lack of forethought in my mind. As we ride along this second to last little stretch here, I suppose, sometimes I talk about if a bike's worth buying just for the engine. Would you buy a Royal Enfield Himalayan just for the engine? No, I don't think so. But it's a weird quandary, right? Because, like, I don't think this engine is a real standout in a way that's sort of, I don't know, desirable, I guess. I mean, it works fine. I don't dislike it. I just don't think that I would have it instead of something else. However, it is a single cylinder thumper from Royal Enfield, and that's Royal Enfield's thing. I guess I think it's caught between being modern enough that it's trying to feel modern and doesn't deliver the most Royal Enfield of all Royal Enfield feelings. And it also just isn't quite as good, I don't think, as that CF Moto engine, for example. And I guess the KTM 390 engine is flawed also, but I don't know, kind of like rowdier and a little bit more performance based. So I think this engine serves a good tour, and it does everything that it's supposed to. I just don't know if that would be the reason I'd get the bike. I think that discussion around the engine is actually a good segue into answering the question that I posed at the beginning of the show about this bike feeling so modern that it's not a Royal Enfield anymore. And ultimately, I don't think that that's true. I think it does have a little bit of an archaic and agricultural feel, as I've said up to this point, which, for better or worse, is kind of Royal Enfield's thing, especially with singles. And I do think that it balances it just about right. It does feel a little bit more modern. It's smooth on the highway. It's a decent sport tourer for this category anyway, but it definitely feels like a Royal Enfield. It does not feel like other bikes. That, I think, has more value to add to the Royal Enfield name than it detracts from the capability of the motorcycle. In this day and age, I really find myself liking motorcycles that are a little bit unapologetic. I've probably said this on the show before. They don't try to accommodate too much. The bike is what it is, and the company is what it is. And they sort of are making a motorcycle and saying, this is what we've created. It's good for these reasons. It's not so good for these other reasons. We hope you like it. Rather than just trying to always be some ultimate and never quite hitting the mark. I think this bike gives some things up, but it holds on to some things that are pretty important. Well, sometimes the dirt road shortcut is a little bit more of a gimmick. Whoa, hey! There's a choo-choo train on our dirt road shortcut. Yeah, we get it. You're very big and loud. All right. Free to take our dirt road shortcut, which of course, for the Himalayan 450 is not, you know, we're not just joking around here. This is what the bike is kind of supposed to do. Tackle this kind of thing and more. I can do ride modes over here. I'm going to do performance mode, ABS rear off, which is a nice feature. And I don't think there's any traction control on this bike, which I think I'm grateful for, because come on, what do we need traction control for? Okay, we're going to go to the right. That's the tricky route. That's the Himalayan route, you know. Wrap. Performance mode. Actually, you know, pretty nice to be able to shut off the old rear ABS. That's actually a nice feature. Muddy and slippery. These tires are not, you know, full on. Really, 80. Oh, I went the wrong way. Okay, there we go. Through the puddle. Yeah, we're fording a little trash puddle here in Los Angeles. Oh boy, almost fell off. It's so slippery. It's so slippery. But this, I don't know. This really feels appropriate for this bike. You just trundle along. You notice I'm not standing up. I don't really have a lot of. I don't know. I can stand up. Can I stand up? Sure, I can do it. See, I can do it, Mom. But it's not really what I feel like doing. It still feels like a sit-down adventure bike. The ruts are sketchy. Mud's sketchy. Woo! It's not really a rowdy off-road adventure bike. That's not really what it does. I still feel like sitting down and trundling through, even though the suspension is up for it. Doesn't have that kind of energy, you know? But I think that's okay, like I said. It's kind of what I would expect and almost want from this bike. All right, now the foot pegs are all slippery. Can we do a wheelie? Second gear seems bold. Let's try first. Ready? Alley, hip. Oh, look at that. Pretty good wheelie. We even got a shift in there. Yeah, it's not really the Himalayans thing, but that's the kind of thing. I mean, the Himalayan 411, the old bike with the air-cooled engine, you're not pulling that off. And it's indicative of the capability of the bike. It's a little bit more ready for that kind of thing, and I do appreciate that. Okie doke, one last question to answer, of course. Can you back it in? Yes, you can, because you can shut off ABS. Whoa, Zach. Getting swazy. Tires all dirty and slippery. All right, one more entering the old office parking lot. Here we go. Very good one. It's like kind of long and heavy, so woo. Oh, I got neutral. That's why I screwed up. Okay, Zach. All right. Grow up, Zach. Lots of spaces for the U-turn test, everybody. Let's see here. We're gonna line up on this line, just inside this line. We're gonna go. We're gonna go feet up, full lock left. Oh yeah, I mean. 1.5, I think. Really good turning radius and low speed manners like this. The engine is energetic a little bit, but chug-a-luggy in a way, if that makes sense, that suits the bike's personality and low speed riding as well. All right, let's put it up on the old center stand, shall we? Bike's got a center stand. Let's use it. And we can listen to, oh wow, it's all covered in mud, look at that. We can listen to this engine one more time. Still a pretty heavy flywheel, right? You hear that like rear rather than going rah, rah, rah. It looks pretty good all covered in mud, I gotta say. Suits the machine. Front of the bike pretty clean, right? This is a big old dorky fender that comes way down here. It didn't barf too much mud up on the radiator or anything like that. Just sort of got the skid plate in the front of the engine. I wish I could say the same for the shock. Well, the shock's pretty clean, I guess. I wouldn't hate seeing a little flap on this fender or something like that, because it's like all over the linkage and stuff. I don't know, whatever. Either way, looks great with dirt on it, don't you think? All right. Okie dokie. Let's dive into some Instagram questions, shall we? First question is from Rich Tiger J, who says, finally, this is the one I've been waiting for. This bike is the reason I got my license last year. All right, that's not a question, but let's take a moment, shall we? Give a little round of applause for Rich Tiger J. Welcome, 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 Rich Tiger J. I hope that you get your Royal Enfield Himalayan 450. I hope you like this review, and I hope you have many, many miles of fun. Next question is one I saved. We covered it a little bit in the episodes. From Destination Yonder, who says, does it still have the charm and ruggedness of the old one, or has it become too fancy and modern? Not too fancy and modern. It's a little bit, but it's not too fancy and modern. It still feels like a Royal Enfield, and hopefully I answered your question during the ride. Next question is from Matt Susi, who says, is this an adventure bike with dual sport specs or a dual sport with adventure kit? Good question, right? Because the 450 liquid cooled single is sort of a dual sport size engine, right? There's a lot of dual sports out there that are approximately this engine size and characteristic. So is it a dual sport that's sort of adventure, or is it an adventure bike that's sort of dual sporty? I think it's very much a small adventure bike. It's heavy, it's good on the road. It doesn't feel like a dirt bike at heart. It feels like a street bike that's ready to take on some off-road stuff, which is the core tenet of adventure bikes in general. So hopefully that helps. Next question is from Shin Choi, who asks, do you think the Triumph Scrambler 400 would do the Himalayas better than the Himalayan? Or is this the Enfield's natural home turf? Well, having ridden a Triumph Scrambler 400X in the Himalayas myself, as some of you may know, I can say that I think I'd rather have this bike than that one if I was going to be in the Himalayas. A lot of the riding is sort of dirt roads and paved roads and twisty roads and a variety, but not something the Scrambler X can't do. But then again, every now and then there's some rugged, nasty stuff where you got to go across the river or down through a really pothole, ruddy, nasty, and I think this bike would be better suited. I like the set of equipment better, I like the 21-inch front wheel better. It's the Enfield's home turf. That's the answer to your question. I think I give the nod to this bike. Last question is from UT Rockets fan 03, who says, based on all of the middleweight adventure bikes in the market, which character would represent the Himalayan if it were a Disney character? I love this question. Love this question. I'm not a Disney historian or even expert or anything. I did think about it a little bit, though. The only first thing that comes to mind is the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I know that sounds like I'm teasing and I'm saying like it's the polite, weird, little ugly one. But I do think that it has such a specific look. You know, it's not a generic hero, I guess. It has such a specific look and it has such a specific feel. It's the kind of bike that people love to hate on the surface of it. You know, like, Royal Enfield, they don't do the kind of adventure that I do. But once you get to know it, by gosh, I think that's a little rude for a comparison to the Himalayan 450, but it's the one that struck me right out of the gate. The main emotion that I get from the Himalayan is sort of, it's endearing and wants to be helpful. And thanks for coming with me on that little acid trip. Anyway, thank you so much for all of your questions, especially the one about Disney characters, even though I don't really know what I'm talking about. There were some great questions in there. I so appreciate it. I had a great time on this ride. Stick with me just another couple minutes, and we'll put this sucker on the Daily Rider leaderboard. All right, everybody, here we are inside RevZilla West at the Daily Rider leaderboard, and we got a Royal Enfield Himalayan 450. As a friendly reminder of what's on the board thus far, we got a CF Moto Ibex 450, which pretty much a direct competitor to that Royal Enfield. Yamaha's MT-09, Kawasaki Ninja 7 Hybrid filling out the podium, and then the Honda DAX 125 Mini Moto. So yeah, very different machines on the board from the Royal Enfield, except for that CF Moto Ibex 450, which, like I said, kind of a direct competitor. We'll talk about that in just a minute. The Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 is a better daily rider than the DAX 125 for pure capability reasons, though it is heavier and a little bit difficult to manage and more expensive, but come on, let's be honest. Is it better than a Ninja 7 Hybrid? Yeah, I think so. Ninja 7 Hybrid was not my favorite motorcycle. I don't think it's really the blend of capability, versatility, and performance that it was supposed to be, so Royal Enfield is going to beat that one out. And now we're getting up into the top two positions here. Is the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 better than an Ibex 450? No, I don't think it is. And keep in mind, I am not telling you whether or not I think the motorcycles are better from the standpoint of which government is more sinister for the country in which it was built, or how reliable I think it will be. I only rode them for a few hundred miles here. As far as
outright capability, which one I would pick up the key for if I was going to ride to work, or in the case of adventure bikes, if I was going to ride to work or if I was going to ride to the top of Alaska, which one would I take? I would take the CF Moto. So the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 is going to finish below the Ibex 450, and that leaves the MT-09. Is the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 a better daily rider than the Yamaha MT-09? In some ways, it's just like a lot more predictable, and it's easier, and it's, you know, it's not as exhilarating. It's not as sporty. It's not as advanced. It's not as fast. And so, you know, if that's what you're after, then the MT-09 is certainly going to deliver. These are very, very different motorcycles, and it makes it very difficult to rank them on a board like this. Those two bikes sitting next to each other in the garage, I think I'm going to pick the MT-09. I think I'm going to pick the MT-09. I think it's maybe odd to see the Himalayan 450 and the Ibex 450 split around a sport bike or a sporty bike like the MT-09, but that's what I'm going with. I do think that ultimately the Royal Enfield Himalayan's outright capability is hindered by that vintage feel. I think it's a charming bike, and I don't need my adventure bikes to be stand up, attack the jumps, kind of, you know, raw, rugged kind of bike. That's not what I need. Objectively, from outright performance and capability standpoint, it is down a rung from the Ibex 450, and ultimately in some sort of weird fourth dimension of daily rider reviews, it's behind the MT-09 as well. Good bike though. I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of happy miles, including Rich Tiger J, what was it? Something like that, who got their license just for this bike. And I think they and people who are arranging their expectations properly are going to be really charmed and happy with the miles they spend on a Royal Enfield Himalayan 450. Another successful ride in the books, I like to think. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I know I did. I'm going to go wash off my jeans now from all the mud we splattered on it. Always a good sign on a commute to work if you got to wash your shoes off and your jeans. In the meantime, everybody ride safe. Have a good one. See you next time.
Lost the road. Is there a road here? No, there's no road. There's no road, it's just a river.